Okay, we are back. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to go on to our next segment, which is a comes from an article in the Chicago Sun-Times, and it's about titled "Mental Health Clinicians Will Start Answering Some 911 Calls in Chicago Instead of Cops." Yay! We're moving towards a crisis response. Boo! They're doing it incredibly slowly and possibly going in the wrong direction. Why? What is it about this mayor that she just can't get police reform, meaningful police reform done? What is it? I'm not sure what her love of police is and why that happens, but it's holding her back. This is an article from the Sun-Times by David Strout and Tom Schuba, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And I'm using their names today because this article is a piece of crapola. It is very, very bad. They don't have any clue what they're talking about. So Chicago is testing this pilot program, right? And it sounds interesting, a pilot. Now, you would ask yourself, okay, that sounds good if you don't know nothing about the topic. They're starting. Ladies and gentlemen, a bunch of other cities started last year. Now, you want to know what all those cities, most if not all of them, have in common? To one extent or another, they're mirroring or replicating in whole what has been done not for 2 or 3 years in Eugene, Oregon, in Springfield, Oregon, but for 30 years. Not 2 or 3 years, 2 or 3 decades. Chicago doesn't need a pilot. Go study what's going on in Eugene, what's been going on since the late 80s. Why do we need a pilot? Haven't they pretty much learned everything you need to know? They know what works. This, to some extent for me, looks like theater. It seems to me that Lightfoot got pushed on defund, and she's worried about what these other cities are doing, and she's worried about re-election. So she's like, we'll start something. We'll make it as meek and weak as possible. You'll notice there's a pattern in what Lightfoot does that way around justice issues. And actually, I think they're doing it the wrong way. Whether it's on purpose, I don't know, but I think Lightfoot is so pro-police that she just can't let go. Okay, so let's take a look at the article. For the first time in Chicago, some 911 calls for mental health emergencies won't be answered by police officers, but with mental health professionals paired with paramedics. Right, but I'm going to tell you why that actual sentence, their first meaningful sentence about the program, is actually wrong, and I'm going to show you with the stuff they wrote. But anyways, let's get it. In one pilot program starting this fall, the paramedic will be placed with a mental health clinician for behavioral health calls. In another, a paramedic will work with a recovery specialist on calls involving substance abuse. Awesome. That sounds pretty good. They don't need pilots. We know it works in Eugene. Don't need pilots. Continue. Mental health clinicians will be on hand at 911 center to monitor situations. But questions remain how well these new responders will be able to de-escalate violence that can erupt during such calls. Well, bad reporters, horrible reporters, unbelievably bad reporters, unbelievably biased reporters. This has been going on in Eugene, Oregon for 30 years. 30. How have they done it? Next, what does monitor mean? So they're not taking the calls, they're going to be sitting next to the people? What the hell does monitor mean? You know, you're a journalist, you could have asked a question. Why would you do that? It's much easier just to write the press release stuff. So, ladies and gentlemen, yes, sometimes those calls can get violent. Wouldn't you think the CPD would have those numbers? I mean, they only have $1.7 billion in their budget. PhDs working in their research division. Why don't they have that number? And sometimes, how about what percentage of calls actually end up with any kind of violence? Seems the CP should have that. All right, so they get into how Chicago has trained some of their officers on CIT, crisis intervention training, right? Now, we met many years ago. This might be going on 10 or close to 10 years ago. With the police department, we used to meet with internal affairs once or twice a year, the head of IPRA twice a year, the superintendent once a year. And I remember internal affairs, the head of internal affairs, I think it was the head of internal affairs, telling us they were really proud of having like 1,800 or 1,600 officers out of like 13,000 with CIT training. And we said, well, why don't you just train them all? Well, they don't want to spend the money. That's what it is. It's all about the money. The goal was to have one CIT person available on every shift in every district. The problem is if they're tied up, then you're out of luck, right? Now let's get back to the article. Before the pilots begin, those two different pilots, one for drugs, one for mental health. However, the city will staff 2 ambulances each with a police officer trained in crisis intervention training, a paramedic, and a mental health clinician. Okay. This is Lightfoot not being able to let go. She is so pro-police. The idea of crisis intervention, the idea of getting a response that doesn't include the police is because the mere fact that you're putting a cop in a uniform on that scene heightens tensions. It goes up. The cop being there is the problem. The cop and the gun make things much more difficult. Now, you can ask me, how do I know? How do I know that's true? Well, you can go in our archive. I think it was sometime last fall. We interviewed Tim Black and Ebony, I don't remember your last name, Tim and Ebony from CAHOOTS. That's right. Tim used to run the CAHOOTS, crisis intervention, people on the street. He now does consulting for the Whitebird Clinic that helps set CAHOOTS up in other cities. And Ebony currently runs them. We know. They know what works. They've been doing it 30 years. The police, not that those individual officers necessarily, but just showing up with a badge, a gun, and a uniform is a problem on many of those calls. It just is. And then you put in all the context with Chicago with race issues and police violence and stuff. It's stupid. But Lightfoot can't let go of the police. She loves them. We're back at the article. Other aspects of the plan include health clinicians staffing the 911 center to respond to some calls by phone, eliminating the need for police to respond, Heaton said. The program should begin in October. Cool if they can do that. I wonder where else now. See, if we had a reporter worth a shit in this town, these two aren't, where else have they done mental health response through the 911 center over the phone? And how has that worked? How successful has it been? Seems like they didn't ask those questions either. What questions did they ask? I continue. The only options now are the ER or the lockup, Heaton said. But in this pilot, they'll bring you to the center, help stabilize you and connect you with follow-up resources. Aha. Here's the problem, ladies and gentlemen. And I had the same thought, I will tell you, until we dealt with Tim Black and Ebony. Had the same thought. How does CAHOOTS run? And CAHOOTS is like crisis assistance helping out on the street. Their mantra is, and always has been, least intervention possible. That's right. So there's this idea, it was written up in the Atlantic article, and it really wasn't right, that they scoop these people up most of the time and take them to some service. Housing, employment, drugs, whatever. It doesn't mean that they don't ever do that. They just don't routinely do that. That is just not something that's done routinely. Most of the time, the vast majority of their calls are handled on the street where the person is. That's the goal. Least intervention possible. They don't want to pick people up. They don't want to take them anywhere. They will, if need be, they will do it. They said on the show, the vast majority of cases can be, when they're out on calls, resolved by giving the person some food, giving them a pair of shoes, socks, things like that. It isn't about taking them to centers. This is a wrong way of thinking about it. I'll admit it, that's the way I thought about it until I researched it. Why the hell isn't the city researching it? Okay. Now, if you're thinking, hey, wait a minute, we haven't heard from anyone at CAHOOTS. They've only been doing this 30 years. They're probably in the article, right? Nope. Why would they do their job? How hard was it to call? I mean, I had a little crap, social media show, and I got them on. And by the way, Tim Black from CAHOOTS has been in Chicago, both talking to Alderman Rodriguez and the crime lab, I think before the pandemic. I continue with the article. Stuart Butler, a senior fellow at the Brookings Institute who has written about crisis intervention, said the question remains how mental health workers can de-escalate dangerous calls. I agree. The problem is the vast majority of calls that they should be taking cops away are not dangerous. That's just a fact. That's a reality. People are missing it. They think it's about these crisis responders responding to violent calls instead of the police. And while that you're talking about like someone in real mental health crisis, that's a small amount. It's not like it doesn't happen, but it's a really small amount of what the calls or CAHOOTS response actually responds to. I continue. People are not sure quite how to structure these teams, and they're not sure how much responsibility the mental health professionals should have to de-escalate a potentially violent situation, how much backup they need. Really? So you're saying CAHOOTS doesn't know? They've only been doing it 30 years. I think they would have figured that out. Who knows? These idiots didn't ask that question, or they didn't write the answer in. I mean, it's a horrible article about a very important topic. Why not just do an interview with the people from CAHOOTS and say, why aren't you doing it this way, Chicago Review? And as far as I know, as far as it's several months old now, the show, at that point, he had not talked to, Whitebird had not, and CAHOOTS had not heard anything from the mayor's office. So generally, they're starting at a false premise from the start, in my opinion. They could very easily learn from what CAHOOTS did and get this up and running in much quicker, much larger. The reality is the mayor does not want to pay for it. She doesn't want to defund the police, and she doesn't want to take money from the TIF program to pay for this. She's going to slow roll this as long as humanly possible. She doesn't have to take money away from the rich white people she subsidizes or the cops. That's why you're getting this slow, right? Now, CAHOOTS is mentioned at the bottom of the article. The bottom, it's buried, and they don't quote anyone from it. It's a horseshit article. Really, really bad. They simply don't know what the hell they're talking about. They got a couple quotes from a guy at Brookings, and they got this mental health specialist. The vast majority of calls these people show up to have nothing to do with a real crisis situation where someone has a turn of being violent. And the reality is, this is what people don't understand. There are in CAHOOTS in certain situations where there's a co-response, both the police and CAHOOTS will show up. It just turns out the vast majority of calls that CAHOOTS actually shows up to, they don't need a police response whatsoever. It's just the way it goes.